wonderful friends, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be discussing why some mobility aids are seen really positively and something to celebrate, and other mobility aids are seen very negatively and something to hide away and be shamed about. This video idea was sparked when I saw a story on BBC Breakfast the other week on a boy named Alex, age 7, from Lincolnshire, who was born without an arm. Now, I felt like the BBC covered the story very well. They showed Alex's mum talking about Alex and how great he was and how they would let him do anything he wants to do, and gave him the belief that you can achieve anything you want to with one arm. But there were a couple of things that Alex said he wanted to do, and he felt that he could do that better if he had a prosthetic arm. He wanted to do fishing, he wanted to do swimming, and he felt that he could probably play football a little bit better if he had another arm. They weren't quite keen on the NHS prosthetics, but after discovering Open Bionics and visiting an open day to test out the hero arms that they have developed in Liverpool, he was sold and he wanted one, and quite rightly so. If you want to try one of those arms, Alex, you try one of those arms. They look amazing, and on the website it even says use your limb difference to be your superpower. They're called a hero arm, and they really do inject that superhero vibes into their branding. And they do look very futuristic and something out of a sci-fi movie. Obviously, these arms, they come with quite a price tag, around £13,000. And luckily for Alex, he and his parents, they set up a GoFundMe page, and someone named James Anderson, who is a plumber and has a non-profit charity to help people with disabilities and people who are elderly, donated the money in full so that Alex could try one of these arms. What I'm trying to get at here is this story was depicted in the media as being so positive and so inspirational and filled with so much joy and light, and the BBC are following this story, so we're going to be seeing Alex get his arm very soon. But when someone needs to use a wheelchair, for example, it's always depicted and always seen as so negative. And I understand that when someone needs to use a wheelchair, it's often because something has been taken away from them, such as their mobility. They might not be able to walk, or they might not be able to walk very far. But when someone has had maybe their arm amputated or born without an arm, their movements and things have been taken away as well. But why is the wheelchair seen so negative? I have a couple of ideas. Disability and wheelchairs are often seen as giving up. They're often portrayed as something that only elderly people use who are maybe approaching the end phase of their days on this earth. But they're not seen as a tool of liberation. You know, that elderly person might need a wheelchair, but it means that they can go out and enjoy their life for as long as they can, and they're not stuck at home or stuck in bed all day. That's a good thing, whether you're elderly or not. But often we associate elderly with mobility aids. Don't get me started. When I was looking for a stair lift, all of the people who were modelling the stair lifts were people over the age of 60. That's not always the case. This is why representation matters, and authentic representation matters. Don't get me started on Candace Owens. You may have seen this video that I made where she didn't want to see people in wheelchairs who were modelling adaptive underwear. She didn't want it in her space, which again goes to show you that some people just don't want disability there. And it's, you know, it's seen not to be desired, it's seen not to be sexy, it's seen not to be pretty or a positive thing, when in fact disabled people are pretty badass. You know, we've changed laws, we're currently fighting for rights, we are great problem solvers, we think outside the box. There are so many benefits to hiring disabled people for jobs, to using disabled people in your campaigns or having them in your space. Another idea is when you start to use a wheelchair, you become a minority and you are different to other people and you stand out and people feel awkward and uncomfortable. And quite often when we use a wheelchair, we're then faced with access barriers where we can't get into buildings, for example, or we can't get, your everyday run-of-the-mill jobs because they're not accessible. So therefore, it then feels like things are closing in on us and we don't have the same opportunities as our non-disabled peers. Using a wheelchair, yes, it has closed a lot of doors for me, but it's also opened up a lot of doors for me. And I really wish that this was depicted more in the media, that using a wheelchair is not a symbol of weakness, it's not a symbol of giving up. And it's not just the media, even sometimes healthcare professionals don't want you to use a wheelchair because they feel like you're giving up. I've been contacted by quite a lot of people who have said my doctor doesn't want me to use a wheelchair, but they're in constant pain and they're not having the quality of life that they deserve. Something else that I would like to share with you is quite often I get messages from you saying, oh, I'm so excited my wheelchair comes next week, or here's a picture of my new wheelchair. And they're messaging me. Quite often they say, you're probably only one of the only people that will get this, because I promote that wheelchairs are a tool of liberation and a positive thing. But it just goes to show you that their families and friends just don't quite get it. I really feel like the media has a lot to answer for when it comes to showing and talking about disabilities. And I feel like they're very much controlling the narrative. What about Katie Price, who fell off a wall in 2020, shattering all of the bones in both of her feet? If you don't know who Katie Price is, she also goes by the alias of Jordan, and she was a successful glamour model or page 3 topless model in the 90s and early 2000s. Look at the coverage on this. I believe having a lot of backlash on this story, it has been taken down. So I actually found this on this person's Instagram page and remembered it from a couple of years ago because this story, it stays in one's mind. I believe this was featured in the Sun newspaper. I mean, not the greatest newspaper in the world, but always had small, dinky, perfect princess feet. But now they're completely mangled with the most disgusting scars along the sides. Well, that's not very fair because lots of people have scars and you shouldn't be ashamed of your scars. They tell a story, and scars, again, is another thing in the media that has been portrayed as being evil and ugly. Think about Scar from The Lion King, for example. Like something from a horror film. The scars are so disgusting, they look like Cornish pasties. Not only am I in a wheelchair, but I have to learn to walk again and I'm disabled. It's humiliating. I feel so embarrassed being pushed around. People treat me differently and I don't know why my boyfriend stays with me. I mean, oh my goodness, we have a lot to unpack there. I understand Katie went through a very traumatic injury and I'm sure her mental health suffered. I feel like she could have chosen her words too, especially as she has a disabled son. Don't forget, the Sun had a choice on how to word it and how to print it, and I feel like this is very damaging to the disability community. I mean, to be honest with you, that last paragraph that I just read depicts everything that I was just talking about how the media controls the narrative here. She has kind of become disabled, and that's how she has always associated people with disability. Now, I don't want this to be a huge kind of Katie Price story here, but I believe Katie has had a lot of therapy and a lot of help and is kind of on the mend. Next, there is the story that I'm sure you were all familiar from last year, where the Daily Mail said that the Queen is using a wheelchair and is cancelling engagements because she is very proud and doesn't want to be seen as struggling. She has her own ableist views that a wheelchair is something that, she's giving up and she can't be seen in a wheelchair and, she's the Queen. Adding that she doesn't want any comparisons to Princess Margaret in a wheelchair as they were embarrassing. Now, I understand that the Queen was probably suffering with a lot of pain and it is hard for people, I do understand that, but it's hard for people because of these ableist attitudes and, not seeing a wheelchair as a positive thing and a thing of liberation. I know she was very ill, but she may have been able to have attended her Jubilee if she had used a wheelchair. Who knows? We don't know that for sure, but obviously she didn't want to be seen in that state because it's embarrassing. Now, speaking of Princess Margaret, by the way, and these embarrassing photos, I thought, how awful are they? So I had a look, and I don't know about you, but I don't think that these are embarrassing. I see a well put together woman in a wheelchair. Obviously, you know, she looks like she's been in the war, she's got a broken arm there, but I certainly don't think they're embarrassing. But obviously, subconsciously, people are going to be reading that, associating wheelchairs with the elderly, giving up, and embarrassing. Here's my quick thought, right? When you look at the hero arm or the prosthetic blades people use, or the Omeo, for example, or the Batec, these are all very new technologies. Do people feel more comfortable with them because they are new technologies in the now and liberating people's independence in a way that people like and feel more comfortable with? When I go out in my Batec, people are like, oh my god, that's so cool, that is a nifty bit of kit. And like when I'm in the Omeo and the person who uses the Omeo, Matt, no one ever asks him about his disability. They're always like, oh my god, that's so cool. Is that because they are more comfortable with that because it is very modern, cutting edge, cool technology that's also used in like segways and things as well? Interesting thought. I'd love to know what you think about that. Would you agree with me? Do you think some mobility aids are seen more positively than others? And why do you think that is? Why is the bionic arm seen really, really cool, but using a wheelchair maybe not so much? I have to say that I feel over time things are starting to make a slight improvement in some areas when it comes to disability and media coverage. I think some media outlets are choosing to employ people with disabilities. They're letting disabled people finally speak. We've got Samantha Renck, who has got her column in the Metro. If you don't read it, she has some fantastic stories on there. A particular favourite of mine was how the media covered the Rob Burrows story and her thoughts on that, which I very much echo myself. So go and give that a read. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. I have some bonus footage for you here. Now, if I was covering the story on Katie Price and the Queen, maybe this is how the covers would look. If you have enjoyed this video, I think you will enjoy this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to share, give a thumbs up, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye!